We shared a Google Calendar because we'd been sharing one since the first year we were married. Color-coded. Her events in blue, mine in green, shared stuff in gray. We used it for everything: dentist appointments, school events, dinner plans, the oil change I'd been putting off, her sister's birthday. It was the administrative skeleton of our life together, and we'd both been adding to it for 6 years without thinking about it. The way you stop thinking about the air conditioning until it breaks. I opened it on a Wednesday evening to add a parent-teacher conference for the following Thursday. Standard stuff. I teach history at a high school in Eugene, Oregon, and conference week is one of the more logistically complicated stretches of the year, and I wanted to make sure the time was blocked so Beth knew I'd be late. Her calendar was open on the same screen because it was always open on the same screen. And on Thursday, the same Thursday I was adding my conference, there was an entry in her blue. Coffee, Owen, 2 p.m. Oakway Center. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Then I looked back through the calendar. There were 11 of them. My name is Paul. I'm 41. I've been teaching high school history at a school on Echo Hollow Road in Eugene for 14 years, which means I've been doing this long enough that I have former students who are now in their early 30s and who occasionally email me to say they finally understand something I said in class that didn't make sense at the time. I find that genuinely gratifying in a way that never gets old. It's not a glamorous profession and it doesn't pay the way it should, but I care about it the way you care about things that matter regardless of compensation, and I've never seriously considered doing anything else. Her name is Beth. She's 38, works as a nurse practitioner at a family practice clinic on Coburg Road. She's been in healthcare for 12 years, did her RN first, went back for her NP, the slow, deliberate climb of someone who knows what they want and is willing to do the work to get there. She has the particular quality of good medical people, which is that she can hold a lot of information at once and stay calm while holding it, and that quality extends to how she moves through ordinary life. Things that would rattle most people don't rattle Beth. She's the one who handles the car accident calmly while everyone else panics. She's the one who knows where the important documents are and what to do with them. We met in 2016 at a friend's birthday party at a place on 5th Street downtown. She was standing near the door talking to someone I didn't know and laughing at something I couldn't hear, and my friend Marcus, different Marcus than any other story, I want to be clear, said, "That's Beth, you should talk to her," with the specific emphasis of someone who has already decided that two people should know each other. I talked to her. Marcus was right. We dated for 18 months and got married in the spring of 2018 at a small venue on the Mackenzie River. 60 people, good food, a string quartet that Beth had been very specific about, a late afternoon ceremony with the river in the background that looked like something from a magazine that neither of us had been trying to recreate. I remember every detail of that day with a clarity I didn't know I had. We bought our house on Chambers Street the following year, a 4-bedroom Craftsman with a sunroom that Beth had specifically wanted and that I'd thought was a luxury, and that turned out to be the room we both lived in most. The room where the afternoon light came in long and warm and where most of our good evenings happened. The garden she'd planted along the back fence. The specific smell of the house when it rained and the windows were open. 6 years. We'd been through things that mattered. Her father's health scare in 2020, my mother's death in 2021, a miscarriage in 2022 that we'd navigated together and that I'd thought had brought us closer in the specific way that grief shared becomes something solid. We were not a perfect couple. We were real. We had friction and resolution and the ongoing project of two people who had chosen each other, continuing to choose each other every day. My flaw, and Beth had been clear about this more than once, in the direct way she was direct about difficult things, is that I live too much in my head. I'm a historian by training and disposition, which means I process events analytically, build frameworks, look for patterns and causation, and I do this to my own emotional life in a way that can make me seem distant even when I'm not. I'd be having a feeling, and before I'd let myself feel it, I'd have already begun cataloging and classifying it. And Beth had said more than once that she needed me to be in the moment with her rather than taking notes on it from a slight remove. I'd tried. I'd gotten better in stretches and then slipped back. The historian in me observes. Sometimes the person I was supposed to be just needed to show up and stay. The first thing I noticed was in March. Beth had mentioned a name, Owen, in the context of a continuing education seminar she'd attended in Portland. Healthcare NPs do ongoing professional development. and the Portland seminars were a regular part of her calendar, and Owen Caldwell was apparently one of the presenters, a physician from a Portland health system who specialized in something I didn't fully catch and that I now can't remember, which is its own kind of detail. She'd mentioned him once, said the presentation had been interesting, and I'd said something generic and appropriate and moved on. He came up again in April. She'd been in an online professional forum where he apparently contributed regularly, and she mentioned something he'd said in a discussion thread about prescribing practices. Professional context. Reasonable. I noticed the name appearing for the second time and filed it in the same place I filed most things that didn't immediately require action, in the back of the mental index where I kept things that were interesting but not urgent. In May, the late evenings started. Not dramatic ones. Not come home at midnight late. More like the kind where she'd been working until 7 or 8, or would have an evening telehealth session she hadn't mentioned at breakfast, or would say she was running behind and to eat without her. The clinic she worked at had expanded its hours, and she'd said more than once that the patient load had increased and the administrative burden was significant, and all of that was completely plausible because I'd watched her come home exhausted from work for 12 years, and I knew what genuine occupational fatigue looked like. Except that in May she sometimes came home from the late evenings in a mood that wasn't fatigue. It was lighter, more present, the specific quality of someone who has had a good evening rather than a long one. I noticed it once. I noticed it again. I told myself I was confusing the days, mixing up which evenings were the late clinic ones and which were something else, and that the good mood was probably just the relief of being done with a long week, and I went back to my lesson plans. In June, her phone started behaving differently. Not dramatically, just slightly. She'd always been someone who left her phone on the kitchen counter when she came home, who answered texts in front of me without any self-consciousness, who treated her phone as a neutral object rather than something to be managed. In June, the phone stayed with her more. I noticed this over about 3 weeks. Noticed it the way you notice a subtle change in someone's behavior when you've been watching them for 6 years, a calibration that's too fine for anything except long familiarity to detect. I said nothing. I told myself I was reading too much into a changed phone habit, that people's phone behavior shifted for 1,000 reasons that had nothing to do with anything, and that I was already in my head about things I couldn't name clearly, and that it was going to make me into someone I didn't want to be. There was an evening in June that sits with me. Beth was in the sunroom reading, or appearing to read. The book was open, but I couldn't tell from the kitchen if she was actually reading or looking at her phone, and the afternoon light was coming in the way it came in the summer, long and amber, and she looked beautiful in it the way she always did, and I was standing at the kitchen counter making dinner, and I thought, I don't know if everything is okay. Just that. The quiet landing of a thought I'd been trying not to think. I stood there with the thought for a moment, and then I finished making dinner, and she came to the table when I called her, and we ate and talked, and the evening was fine. I was measuring the surface of things. I know that now. The surface was fine. July was when the background worry became something with more structural weight. The professional development trips were more frequent. Beth had always done the Portland seminars a couple of times a year, 2, sometimes 3, usually a Friday, and she'd be back by Saturday evening. In July, she went twice. In August, she went again, and this one was an overnight. She said the seminar ran through Saturday, and it made more sense to stay. I said okay. She texted me from Portland that evening. She called Sunday morning before she drove back. All of it normal. I was in the process of building a case that I didn't want to be building. The specific torture of that period is hard to describe to someone who hasn't been in it. I'm a teacher. I teach critical thinking. I teach students to examine primary sources, to interrogate evidence, to separate what a document says from what it implies, to hold multiple interpretations simultaneously while weighing their plausibility. I was doing all of that to my own marriage, and I hated myself for doing it, and I couldn't stop. The mundane center of it. I was grading papers on a Saturday afternoon in early August, sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of essays about the Cuban Missile Crisis, and I was moving through them with the mechanical competence of someone who has read about 700 variations on the same argument, and underneath the grading, I was running the parallel track that had been running for months. Owen's name in March. The late evenings. The phone. The Portland trip. Beth in the sunroom looking beautiful in the amber light while I couldn't tell if she was reading. I set down the essay I was holding. I looked at the kitchen. The garden through the back window. The last of the summer flowers Beth had planted along the fence. I thought, I could just ask her. I could sit down with her tonight and say I've been feeling something that I can't name and I need to know if everything is actually okay. That was the right thing. I knew it was the right thing. I picked the essay back up. A history teacher who knows better than to ignore primary sources, choosing to ignore the primary sources of his own life, because asking the question out loud makes it real in a way that it wasn't yet while I was still just thinking it. That's the thing I have to sit with. Not that I didn't notice. I noticed. I just wasn't ready to act on what I'd noticed. In late August, Beth said she needed to start going to the clinic on some Saturdays. A new partnership they'd taken on, expanded weekend hours, the usual expansion of obligations language that clinics use when they've grown faster than their staffing allows. I said okay. I asked if it was going to be every Saturday. She said no, just when things were particularly heavy. She had a Saturday clinic shift on September 6th. I know the date because I went to look at our shared calendar to see if we'd had anything planned that afternoon that I'd need to move. That's when I opened the calendar to add the parent conference. I want to describe what it feels like to find 11 calendar entries you weren't expecting. It happened over about 4 minutes. I found the Thursday entry first. Coffee, Owen, 2 p.m. Oakway Center, and I sat with it for maybe 30 seconds, telling myself it was professional, telling myself she had coffee with colleagues and peers all the time, telling myself Owen Caldwell was the presenter from Portland, and this was a follow-up on continuing education topics. Then I scrolled back. The entries went back to May. The first one was May 14th. Lunch, Owen, 12:30. Provisions market. Then May 28th. Coffee, Owen, 3 p.m. Then June. Then July. Then August. And the overnight Portland trip was on the calendar too. In her blue, labeled simply Portland Seminar with no further detail, except that when I looked at the time block it ran from Friday afternoon to Sunday morning. And I thought about the fact that she'd texted me from Portland on Friday evening and called me Sunday morning. And both of those things were consistent with the calendar entry and also consistent with something else entirely. 11 entries. May through September. Coffee, lunch, dinner once in July, the Portland trip. I sat at the kitchen table with the calendar open on my laptop, and I thought about the historian's principle that I'd taught students for 14 years. When the evidence accumulates in one direction, the accumulation is itself significant. You don't wait for a confession. You follow the evidence where it leads. I Googled Owen Caldwell. He was easy to find. A hospitalist physician at a Portland health system, mid-40s, had done some academic work and some conference speaking in the healthcare space, which matched exactly what Beth had described in March. He had a professional headshot and a faculty page and a handful of published articles in healthcare journals. He was real and specific and 3 hours north of Eugene, and apparently someone my wife had been having coffee and lunch and dinner with for 5 months. I closed the laptop. I made dinner. I don't know why I made dinner. I made it because the time was right for dinner, and my hands knew what to do, and I needed my hands to be doing something. Beth came home at 6:30. She hung up her jacket. She said something about traffic on Coburg Road. She asked how my day was, and I said fine, and she went to the sunroom to decompress the way she did after long clinic days. I put her plate on the table. I sat down across from her. I opened my laptop. I turned it to face her. She looked at the screen. She looked at the calendar. She looked at my face. Paul, there are 11 of them, I said. Going back to May. She looked at the laptop again. Something moved through her face that I'd been a historian long enough to read. Not just guilt, but something more complicated. The expression of someone who had been holding two versions of reality simultaneously and had just watched one of them collapse. I can explain. Okay. We met professionally, and then It's not. She stopped. She pressed her hand flat on the table. I know how this looks. How does it look, Beth? It looks like, she stopped again. She shook her head. We've been meeting. Since May. It started as professional, and then it. Did you go to Portland with him? The silence that followed lasted long enough. That was a real seminar, she said. He was presenting. I was there for the seminar. That's not what I asked. She looked at the table. Yes. I sat with that for a moment. The overnight trip. The text from Portland. The Sunday morning call when she was driving back. All of it real, and also all of it something else. How long has it been? Not professional, I said. Since June. She looked up at me. The coffee meetings in May were genuinely. I believe you about May, I said. I'm asking about June. June. She nodded slightly. The third meeting. We were at Provisions and it. She stopped. I know there's nothing I can say that makes June acceptable. I'm not trying to make it acceptable. I thought about something. I'd been turning it over since I'd found the entries. Owen Caldwell is married, I said. I'd found this on his faculty page, a brief bio mention of his wife, also a physician. She looked at her plate. Is he? Yes. Very quiet. Does his wife know? I don't think so. No. I looked at the calendar on my laptop screen, the 11 blue entries in the neat grid of our shared life. 6 years of color-coded ordinary days. And there they were, sitting in the same calendar, mixed in with the dentist appointments and the school events and the oil change I'd been putting off. Did you add them to the shared calendar? I said. She looked up. Something crossed her face. What? The meetings. They're in the shared calendar. You added them to our shared calendar. She looked at the laptop. I watched her understand what she was looking at, that she had logged 11 meetings with another man in the same calendar we'd been sharing since the first year of our marriage, apparently without registering that I could see them, apparently on autopilot, apparently because she'd been adding things to that calendar for 6 years and the habit ran deeper than the decision. I didn't, she shook her head. I didn't think about. You didn't think I'd look. I didn't think about the calendar at all. She pressed her fingers against her forehead. I just added them the way I always add things. I wasn't, she stopped. That sounds insane. It sounds like 6 years of habit, I said. We sat in the kitchen for a long time. The dinner neither of us was eating. The amber light from the sunroom starting to fade. The garden visible through the back window. Are you in love with him? I said. She looked at the table. Beth. I have feelings that I don't. She shook her head. I don't know how to describe what I feel in a way that's honest and also doesn't destroy everything. And I'm aware that's not your problem. It is my problem, I said. It's exactly my problem. I know. She was crying now. Quietly, the way Beth cried. Without drama, just the fact of tears. I know. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Paul. I don't know how we got here. I looked at the calendar on the screen one more time. Then I closed the laptop. I need to go for a walk, I said. Okay. I don't know how long. Okay. I got my jacket. I walked out the front door and down Chambers Street, and I walked for about 2 hours through the September evening in Eugene, the streets I'd lived on for 16 years, the specific quality of the air in the valley when summer is ending and the damp is starting to come back. I walked until I was tired enough to go home, and I walked a little more past that. And when I came back, Beth was in the bedroom with the light off, and I lay down on the couch in the sunroom where all our best evenings had happened, and I looked at the ceiling and listened to the house. I'm writing this 4 days later. I still don't know what comes next. I said I'd come back. Here I am. The original post got more responses than I expected. I read them over several nights when sleeping wasn't working. Some of you said things that were genuinely useful. Some said things that were more about your own situations than mine, which I understand. We bring what we have. One person wrote, the shared calendar detail is specifically horrible because it means she was so deep inside the habit of your life together that she forgot where the edges of it were, and I've been turning that sentence over for 3 weeks because I think it names something true and I'm still not sure what to do with the truth of it. Here's what happened. Beth has been at her colleague Diane's house for the past 19 days. Diane is 44, also an NP, has been Beth's closest work friend for 7 years, and she responded to the situation with the specific practicality of someone who has been through her own version of a hard thing and knows what the first weeks require. She offered Beth the spare room without asking too many questions, which was the right call, and she has not reached out to me except once, briefly, to say she was sorry and that she wasn't taking sides, which I also found to be the right call. The house on Chambers Street is mine and Beth's, both our names on the mortgage, bought together, built together over 6 years. The legal reality of that is something I've begun to understand through a conversation with an attorney, a straightforward meeting that I went into not knowing what I wanted and came out of still not knowing what I wanted but understanding what my options were. I'm staying in the house. Beth is not. That's where we are for now. Nora, Beth's plant collection, which she'd been building for 5 years and which takes up most of the sunroom windowsill, is still there because she hasn't come for it yet, and I've been watering it. I don't know why I've been watering it. The plants don't know what happened. They just need water. I've been providing water. I told 2 people. My department head, a woman named Connie who has been teaching English at the same school for 22 years, and who has the specific wisdom of someone who has watched a lot of human situations unfold over 2 decades in a school building. Knew something was wrong from the first day I came back after everything happened. She came to my classroom after the last bell on the Thursday of that week and sat in one of the student desks. This enormous and slightly comic thing, Connie folded into a desk designed for a 16-year-old and said, "I'm not going to ask. I'm going to say that whatever it is, you're going to teach well tomorrow anyway because that's who you are. And then when you're ready to talk, I'm here." I told her the outline the following week. She listened. She didn't give advice. She said, "I'm sorry, Paul. You deserved better than that." 3 sentences, and I've been grateful for all of them. My brother is the other person. His name is Daniel. He lives in Portland, and we've been close our whole lives in the specific way of 2 people who grew up in a quiet house and figured out how to talk to each other early because nobody else was doing much talking. He drove down the weekend after everything came out. We hiked the Ridgeline Trail behind the neighborhood, a 6-mile loop I've been doing for 15 years, and we walked the whole thing without me being able to say much for the first 2 miles, and then I said everything for the next 4. Daniel didn't offer conclusions. He asked questions that helped me find the right words for things I'd been trying to name. He said at the end, on the trailhead, that he'd be back the following weekend if I needed him. He was. The complication nobody predicted. Owen Caldwell's wife found out. I don't know the exact sequence of how it happened. I know that Beth ended things with Owen around the time she moved to Diane's. She told me this in one of our conversations, said she called him the day after everything came out and told him it was over, and I believe her. But Owen's wife, whose name is Caroline, apparently found out in her own separate way, through a route that had nothing to do with me and nothing to do with Beth's ending things. The how of it reached me through Daniel, who heard it from a mutual contact in Portland's medical community, which is smaller than it seems. Caroline Caldwell called Beth. I know this because Beth told me during one of our conversations, with the particular tone of someone reporting a consequence they'd known was possible and had arrived anyway. The call was brief. It was not warm. Beth said Caroline's main question had been whether it was still ongoing, and Beth had told her no. It was over, it had ended, and Caroline had said something final and hung up. I've thought about Caroline Caldwell more than I expected to. She's 44, also a physician, has 3 kids with Owen, has been building a life in Portland for 15 years that apparently had a gap in it she didn't know about. We have never met. We share something that neither of us wanted to share, and I hope she's okay. And beyond that, I don't know what I owe her, or what she owes me, or if those categories even apply. I have not contacted Owen. I've decided there is nothing there worth the energy. He's 46, he gave a conference presentation in Portland, and that's all he needed to be, and he became more than that. And whatever he does with the rest of his life is his business. The inside of it. The first morning after Beth went to Diane's, I woke up in the bed in the house on Chambers Street, and the silence was specific in the way that silences are when you know why they exist. I lay there and ran the ordinary boot sequence. What day? What do I have? And the answer to what day it was arrived normally, and the answer to what I had arrived in stages. The full weight of the previous 2 weeks coming back in the order it had happened. I teach a class on primary sources to juniors. The first lesson I did after everything came out, I stood in front of 20 to 16-year-olds and I talked about how historians read documents, and I said something I'd said 100 times before. The absence of evidence is itself evidence. When something is conspicuously missing, ask why it's missing. A student in the back row nodded seriously and wrote it down, and I stood at the front of the room and I thought, I know exactly what that means in practice. And I kept teaching. I found one of her hair elastics on the bathroom counter about 10 days in. The kind she left everywhere, elastic and dark, the small debris of a shared life. I stood there holding it, and I thought about 6 years of her hair elastics on every surface of this house, and I put it in the cabinet under the sink where I put things when I don't know what else to do with them, and I closed the door. There's a coffee place on Willamette Street that we went to on Sunday mornings when neither of us had anything pressing, not every Sunday, but enough Sundays that it was ours. I went last Sunday alone. I sat at the table we usually took. I ordered what I usually ordered. The place was the same place it had always been, doing what it always did, indifferent to what had changed on Chambers Street since the last time I was there. I drank my coffee, and I watched the street, and I thought about the 11 blue calendar entries and the way the habit of a shared life can run deeper than the decisions you make inside it. I still write Beth's name on the shared calendar before I catch myself. Not events. I've taken her off the calendar. Practically speaking, that part is done. But sometimes I'll think about something I need to tell her, a logistical thing, an update about the house, and I'll reach for the calendar to add it, and I'll stop. 6 years of a shared infrastructure doesn't rewire in 3 weeks. The reaching is still there. I'm working on what I reach toward instead. Here's where I actually am. Beth and I have spoken 7 times since she went to Diane's. For logistics conversations. 2 harder ones. And one last Tuesday that was the most honest conversation we've had in maybe 2 years, which is its own kind of information, that the most honest conversation of our recent marriage happened after it had already come apart. She said things about the distance she'd felt from me, the historical processing, the note-taking from a remove, the feeling of having a feeling and looking up to find me analyzing it instead of sharing it. She was not wrong about any of it. She also said that what she'd done with that distance was wrong, and she said it clearly, without packaging it as an explanation that made the wrong thing make sense. She said, "I'm telling you about the distance because I think you should know it, not because I think it caused what I did. What I did is mine." I've been turning that sentence over since she said it. The distinction she was making between context and causation, between contributing factors and responsibility, is a distinction I teach in history class. Primary causes, secondary causes, proximate causes, distal causes. I've explained that distinction to hundreds of students. Hearing it applied to my own marriage by the person who had most reason not to make it was something I didn't expect. She has not asked about reconciliation. I don't know what I would say if she did. I'm not ready to know, and I've decided that's the honest position and the one I'm going to occupy until something shifts. I started seeing a therapist 3 weeks ago. His name is Dr. Robert Sung. He has an office on Willamette Street, and he has caught me doing the historian thing, analyzing instead of feeling, building frameworks instead of being in the room. Exactly once per session so far, which I think is the correct frequency. He said in our second session, "You teach people to find meaning in events after they've happened. That's a useful skill, but you're still in the event. The meaning isn't available yet. The job right now is just to be in it." I wrote that down. Then I realized I was taking notes on my own therapy session, and I laughed. And he looked at me, and I explained, and he said, "That's actually progress." The parent-teacher conferences happened last week. I sat across from parents and talked about their children's progress in history class and whether they were developing their critical thinking and their ability to evaluate evidence and their understanding of causation. I did it well because it's what I do and because I believe in it. And I drove home afterward on Echo Hollow Road in the October dark, and I thought about the shared calendar and the 11 blue entries and the way something can be hidden in plain sight inside the ordinary system of a shared life. Beth's plants are still in the sunroom. I've been watering them. They're doing fine. They don't know what happened. They just need water and light and someone to show up on a schedule, which is apparently something I'm capable of providing. I opened a shared calendar to add a parent conference and found 11 entries I wasn't supposed to find. And the most specifically painful part of it, the part one keep coming back to in the middle of the night when the house is quiet and the sunroom light is off, is not the meetings themselves but the fact that she added them to our shared calendar out of sheer habit. 6 years of living together so deep in her hands that she didn't even notice she was keeping a record. We were so much a life together that she forgot where I ended and she began, and somehow that is both the saddest and the most real thing about all of it. Tomorrow, a man finds a birthday card in his mailbox, addressed to him, handwritten, from someone who signed only a first name he doesn't recognize, and when he shows it to his wife, her face tells him she knows exactly who sent it.